What is up, everyone? Volathis here, and my co-host Vicolan. This is the first episode of VV's DLC, and
Yay.
our first episode. And we haven't killed each other in practice yet. It's a miracle, I say. But our first subject here is going to be on raiding, since Vicolan and myself have spent many years raiding in the MMORPG scene, and we might as well start. Why do we like to raid? For me, it's about getting powerful items from great loot. It's very challenging. You feel very accomplished when you defeat a very powerful boss and taking on those powerful enemies that do take a large group, anywhere from 10 and above, and I usually find a lot of interesting mechanics that are involved in boss fights. What about you?
Yeah, there's so many different mechanics in all the boss fights throughout the history of WoW. That's one of my favorite things about it. But I think my most favorite thing about raiding and WoW is just getting to socialize with new people and all my friends that used to play WoW. But yeah, for the most part, it's just socializing with people and having a good time.
Yeah. And most of those mechanics usually eventually end up in dungeons, but a lot of the more complicated ones will be in raids. Dungeons are usually dumbed down.
Yeah.
Usually.
Speaking of that, the patch that just came out for WoW yesterday introduced a new dungeon, and I did it, and it was a lot of fun. The bosses had some new and interesting mechanics, and it was the second or third boss. No one had any idea what we were doing. Obviously, we were just winging it. We ended up wiping on the boss, and it was just hilarious. Everyone was having a good time with it, which was nice. It's most of the time, especially in a pug group, something goes wrong and people just start yelling and cussing at each other.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case, luckily.
Yeah, that's the advantage of patch day one. No one has any idea what's going on unless they've been beta testing it, and not all the games out there let you beta test those patches. So
Yeah.
So we've gotten one of the pros of why we like to raid. Now the next step, of course, would be a little bit of the cons. Michael and I have been on small servers for many years. We were on a WoW server, a very small one called Tyrannus, and the difficulty in maintaining and forming these raid groups, of course, involves recruitment for raid members, as well as it takes a lot of communication even before you're even raiding. You'll have people that do not show up on time and you never hear from them. And in this day and age, if I don't hear from you, you're dead for all I know. A lot of it, too, is involving people that are not prepared when they show up, not having the proper enchants, as well as making sure all their stuff is good to go. They're mentally not there. And of course, the other problem is if they don't show up, is finding that replacement, which in a lot of times you'll end up looking for a pug, and usually most people, including myself, do not like pugs. I usually find it's a very high risk with very little reward. Occasionally you do find a gem that is worth your time, but usually it's not the case, and part of
That is very rare.
yeah. And usually that's because, they're entering a raid group that they don't raid with. You guys might do a fight differently than what they usually do, or you deal with the mechanics differently. And the other problem is when you bring in a pug is that if they win the loot, that's not going to your main raid group. That's going to something that, unless they're really good, you're probably never going to see again.
Yeah, that was one of the main things I always hated about having to find pugs for our raid groups when people didn't show up or couldn't make it. Several times when we were clearing Mythic SOO, we would have pugs in for Mythic Garage, and almost every time except for once, I think, pug won the mount off the boss, and I love mounts. So to me, that was worse than losing like my best in slot piece of gear.
Yeah, no, everyone likes mounts. No one likes losing a mount to a pug. So,
And then also another thing to add to why we don't like it, as far as the enchants and gems go, at least for WoW, the gems now are nowhere near as prevalent as they used to be. Same with enchants. Nowadays, enchants are only, at least for combat anyway, it's your neck, cloak, and rings. That's it.
Yeah.
Before, it used to be like every slot you had to have enchanted with some sort of combat enhancement,
Yeah.
and gems are just the sockets just have a chance to be on the gear now.
I mean,
Special upgrade.
the main thing that would steam me too is that, I don't know about now, but back when I was raiding, most of that was pretty convenient. Most of these were not very expensive. Like the most expensive enchant usually you had to worry about was your weapon. Other than that, the gems were pretty decently priced in regards.
Yeah. Now, and WoW at least, with how few gems and enchants there are, they are a lot more expensive than they used to be. I remember dropping like 10,000 on just one gem early on into the expansion, and I regret that. I won't do that again.
Yeah. And rating isn't the same depending on which game you're playing. I would say definitely WoW is one of the ones that has really been changing how their raids work. I'm gonna let Vicolan talk about those though because I haven't been through WoW's whole life cycle and I know it's changed a lot since I've stopped playing it, so I'll let him go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, just from what I've read, like I haven't rated in a lot of other MMOs, mostly just WoW, but from what I've read, I think WoW has the easiest time for like casual players to get into raiding, especially now with how the LFR works, which that was introduced back in Cataclysm during Dragon Soul. Um, but it just allows for the casuals that don't have the time or don't want to put forth the extreme effort to hardcore rating, which is good, especially for how casual WoW is nowadays. And there's a lot of people that complain about that, but I mean, I play casually now. I haven't rated in the last two expansions. Yeah, the last time I rated was in SOO.
Right.
But yeah, how the raids work nowadays is for LFR through heroic, it's flex rating, which means the raid can scale depending on how many people you bring, from anywhere between 10 players all the way up to 30 players. Now there is the higher difficulty, which is mythic, and that is only 20 players. You can't bring any. Well, I mean, you could bring less, but you'd be gimping yourself essentially. You'd be missing out, and more than likely, unless you're like the top end rating guilds, you wouldn't be able to clear the content with less than 20 players. Um, but as far as LFR goes, there are some pros and cons to it. It does allow the casuals to get in and see the content, but on the other hand, you'll get the people who just go in and they'll AFK and they'll just be auto attacking the boss the whole time and not trying, and that's really not fair to the rest of the people.
Yeah. Now with LFR2 though, it also allows the players to get some access to the story, and that's a big thing too because raids usually do have some kind of backstory to them, which is very important for the players. At least nowadays I find myself getting a lot deeper into lore, so it's very important to get access to all those aspects. And
exactly,
when I left WoW, Flex was more of an actual raid, and now it's become more of a feature for their raids. So WoW's a good example, unfortunately, just because of the fact that it's been around for many years and it has evolved a lot, and it continues to evolve, and it helps shape the MMORPG community. And so I'll go ahead and take over here. Now, I've had the pleasure of reading in a few other ones. These are only the ones that I've made max level. That would be in Final Fantasy XIV, which is my current game here, and I read a little bit about Rift. I'm going to go ahead and talk just a little bit about Rift, because my raiding experience with that was pretty short. I was, once again, on a small server. I guess I have a habit of picking the small servers, but we were in competition with another faction for server first on the final boss. We did not make it, but their raids were divided up into 10 or 20 man raids. The first one was plant themed, and the final boss was a dragon. It was a really interesting raid. It was one of the more unique raids to me, I thought, at the time. You basically navigated the maze, reaching to the final boss, which was the dragon. But the second to last boss, when he was almost dead, he would teleport you to the beginning of the maze, turn you into a critter, and you had to navigate back to the maze while he's healing and kill him in time. And the final boss, the dragon, was pretty interesting. Classic style, though, of the lower the health, the more mechanics. One of them was there was plants that would spawn, and your off tank had to light himself on fire and run around and light everything. And then it just became a matter of, yeah. It was pretty intense. I can't remember if there was friendly fire on that with the fire, because I thought they left a fire trail. I can't remember for the life of me. But towards the end,
hearing mechanics, sorry to interrupt, but
no,
just hearing mechanics like that, it actually makes me want to try out some raiding and some other MMOs, like especially like the ones that are free to play, because I don't have to obviously I don't have to pay monthly to play them, so I can play them at my own pace. But I'd like to get into some of those and try them out.
Yeah, and the main thing is just towards the end, it's just ad management, and then when you have time, killing the boss. I played a caster, of course, so for me, towards the end of the fight, I never touched the boss. I was too busy killing all the ads. So
I know that feel.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about 14. This is probably the other MMO I've spent the most time raiding in. The raids are basically divided into, I guess you could say, kind of three categories. We have our version of the 20-man raids, which is 24-man raids. This is 3 groups of 8. These are called alliance raids. Their difficulties, I'd say, similar to WoW's LFR in difficulty. They're not too difficult. They give decent upgradable loot, and they follow a loot system of if you win a piece of gear that week, you're done for the week. You can go through the whole instance and not get any loot. I've been there multiple times. It's not fun having to do over again.
Yeah.
It just doesn't do well, and there's always that one boss that trips up a lot of groups. And then the other one, which is, I would say, the more hardcore rating, is the 8-mans. Now, when this first started, it only had one difficulty. It wasn't the most difficult in the world, but it's what we had at the time. It still follows a weekly lockout schedule. And in the current expansion, Heavensward, they added Savage difficulty, which is kind of our version of heroic raids now, and normal's really been dumbed down so people can experience the story in that. And then the only other kind of raid like that is Primals, which is essentially like a single raid boss that requires a group of 8 of people. And of course, with raids comes loot, and each MMORPG has their own different kind of loot system. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over here to Vicolan, because like I said, he's more familiar and up to date with WoW, unlike myself.
Yeah. With WoW, the loot has changed over the years. It's gone back and forth here and there. But as of right now, there's a loot system. It's personal loot. Basically, each person that has attacked the mob or is in the group that's killing the mob has a chance to get their own loot. And if you're in a pre-made group, the leader can actually change this to group loot or master looter or any of the other looting types, essentially. But the new token system, from what I've seen, because I haven't raided yet this expansion, it is similar to how it used to be for Molten Core and Blackwing Lair. The tokens are class specific, and they now work like you get it and then you right click it and it turns into a piece of gear for your spec or class. Something else that is easier to manage gear with nowadays is they made it to where the primary stats on your gear will change depending on what spec you're in. So if you're say you're a boomkin and you want to switch to feral or bear tank, you just switch and it'll change the primary stat from intellect to agility. So that way you're not having to manage massive sets of gear. Now I think think most trinkets, I think there are a few that the agility, intellect, and strength will switch, but most of them do not. And then the legendaries, as of right now, are spec specific, so those won't change. And then there's also a bonus roll method, which is nice if you're having shitty luck with loot, or you just want an extra chance at a certain piece of gear off of a boss that's eluding you. That was introduced back in Mists of Pandaria, which I really like that. Um, as of right now, I just buy one a week on each of my characters and use it on the world boss. And then also for gear, this I don't really like that much because it's so RNG based. There's Warforging and Titan Forging, and the Warforging can add anywhere from +5 to +10 to the base item level of the item that you got. And then Titan Forging is anything that's +15 or higher on the item level. Okay. And then the gem slots are essentially the same thing. It's just a chance for the piece of gear to have a gem slot, which I just don't like how RNG that is. I think they should remove that system or change it to where it's not so RNG based. When that in Hearthstone, after all,
when that first was implemented and missed, for me that just like, oh great, now I have to raid more to get even more best in slot. And
which oh, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. And the main thing, though, I definitely like is with the stat switching, it gives a better chance of loot hitting the floor, which I find very important in raids, is making sure your loot goes to your main people as fast as possible.
Yeah. But, like, with the Warforged and the Titan Forge, there was some drama with Diablo 3 here recently about the Primal Ancients, and they actually changed that, like, almost instantly because of all the bad feedback about it. Which I'm surprised that they haven't announced anything as far as changing how the Warforged and Titan Forge works, because I feel like it's the exact same thing. But yeah, I don't know.
Different game, different rules, different community, I guess. Although Diablo's a pretty grindy game.
It is.
With the other MMOs out there, they have sort of different loot system. Rift had a tier system similar to WoW, but because Rift focused more on creating all these different specs and classes, for them, they did a similar method, but basically you get your tier pieces, but they didn't have any effects without a synergy crystal. And that crystal would be based on your spec, and you have to buy it, and then the bonuses would be applied. The other big thing for me, WoW had legendaries a long time ago, but they didn't focus on them as much as they do now. For Rift, the final boss of each raid, when I was playing, would always drop some kind of legendary. It was at least in the loot table for the bosses. And then with Final Fantasy XIV, with off gear, it usually gets passed out pretty easily because the game focuses on having only one character. Now when you're raiding, though, you can only need for your main class unless you use a loot master system. So that kind of helps it. The other thing is that the armor is more role shared, so I play a black mage, which is a caster, and then you have my other polar class is the summoner. They share loot with me, and we just kind of fight over the gear. Now recently in Alexander Savage, they added a token system similar to WoW. Basically, after so many weeks of raiding, if I get so many tokens, I can turn in for a piece of gear. Kind of a good system to help make sure that you don't go without loot for so long. The other thing is that with 14, that usually the best in slot is a mixture of tome gear. This would be similar to like Valor points and raid gear. So the other advantage of that too is that with the best in slot is I'm not as dependent on getting full raid gear. The other thing is that they do not switch stats. All those stats are static, and recently we got the materia system updated so we can insert it into our WoW gear. And material works basically like gems. The stats are a little bit more simpler though. They're usually single stats. So that takes care of the loot here. Just pass it over to Vicolan.
Yeah. I had some questions for us. basically. These are all mostly WoW related. So I haven't gotten too in depth on some of the other MMORPGs as of yet. But when we're talking about raids throughout the history of WoW, um, what raid did you enjoy the most?
I would have to say Dragon Soul. This was when I came back to WoW after taking a break, and it just kind of felt epic to say you down Deathwing, the Dragon of Chaos, so to speak.
Yeah, he's just. I think he is the largest boss to date in the game.
He takes up a
I'm not
lot of
100%
space.
sure on that,
A lot
but
of
I want
space.
to. I want to say he is.
He's also one
And
of the weirdest ones.
yeah, like I like the different phases during the fight.
Yeah.
It's kind of hectic, but at the same time, it's so epic. And then the ending cutscene where Thrall uses the Dragon Soul and just destroys him. It's pretty awesome. But as for me, my favorite raid would definitely have to be Icecrown Citadel. I had the most fun back then. It was mostly the guild that I was currently raiding with at the time. It was almost like a small family. Uh, there were a few people that I didn't really care for, but there's more that I did, so it made it worth it. I actually made a few lifelong friends from that guild, and I still talk to them to this day. Uh, but yeah, we talked about the raid we most enjoyed. Now let's talk about the one we least enjoyed. I sure this is a no-brainer, but what is your least favorite raid?
Yeah. Siege of Orgrimmar. Least favorite.
Yep.
There's a lot of factors that went into that. I like the story, but the problem with Siege of Orgrimmar is it lasted way too long. I raided in that place for almost over about a year and a half. This was also the time that there was 4 different difficulties to deal with, in a way, and it was a really big raid. It's the main factors that really left a distasteful taste in my mouth. It's just took a while, and just there was just so much. It was a really big raid. I don't even know if there was a night that we actually cleared it in one night, just because how long it took to clear.
Yeah, I can't remember either. But yeah, my answer's the same. And I actually took a couple months break from WoW and stopped raiding basically because of Siege of Orgrimmar. It just took so much out of me and just kind of killed the game for me for a little bit. But you always come back, always.
We'll
Okay,
see.
So we talked about.
We'll see about me, but I would say that a lot of it though is that from what I hear they made a lot of improvements afterwards.
Oh man,
They learned from their mistake.
Legion has been my favorite expansion so far. I think even more so than Wrath of the Lich King, and before Legion, Wrath was my favorite expansion. But and just the patch that they came out with yesterday had so much more content and more world content, which I really enjoy. But yeah, we covered the raid we enjoyed the most, one we didn't enjoy the most. Let's talk about our favorite boss fights. What would be your favorite boss fight?
Shinrock the Breaker from the Throne of Thunder. I thought it was a pretty interesting fight. It's one of those DPS check fights. It was a lot harder for a first boss, and I just like the mechanics, especially with the whole like lightning ball phase where you're running like a chicken with your head cut off. If you're me,
Yeah, I can just imagine listening, hearing you just running around screaming.
there was a lot of screaming. If it wasn't for Scorch, I didn't have much luck.
I was there towards the middle of that raid with you, and I don't remember hearing you scream, but I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be holding your keybind down screaming though. But I could just imagine it.
Yeah,
Your
that's why
craziness.
that's why key bindings are amazing. Because if it was voice activate, I'm pretty sure I'd make the raid death.
Yeah, Yeah, that's true. Uh, but yeah, just that fight alone, man. There's so much craziness going on, and being a first boss fight in that raid, being such a huge DPS check, and then also for your healers, I would not want to heal that fight back then.
No.
F that.
I think I did try to heal. I learned out I'm not a good healer very quickly.
Shocker. But anyway,
Heh.
favorite boss fight. Favorite boss fight for me is definitely a toss up. Well, not really a toss up. I just can't pick out of the two, so I'm gonna say both. Blood Queen Lanethel and the Lich King, both for different reasons. Blood Queen Lanethel because of the amount of damage I was able to output. Back then, I was playing a Boom King, and they were indeed king back then. God, I miss Insect Swarm so much. I love that spell. R.I.P. And then for the Lich King, just the amount of mechanics throughout the fight and the coordination it took to down him, and just the sheer amount of time it took. It was like a 10 or 15-minute boss fight for him, but it was just so nice once you got him to that 10% mark. You knew you had it, and then it just became a loot pinata. So much fun. I remember like our first week trying to down him and the traps. So many people getting blasted by those. It was just hilarious watching people go flying. Between those and the frost orbs, people letting the frost orbs hit them. It's like, see ya. Alright, so now let's go with what's your least favorite boss fight?
It's actually the same fight, Genrock the Breaker, because while there was a huge time investment in it. We died so many times on that thing, the floor was filled with skeletons. And I mean filled with skeletons. It was, of course, being a caster too, I can't move in DPS very well unless I was a fire mage. And I died a lot. I can't remember if we downed it with me on the floor or not. Probably on the floor. Probably.
At least you were clothy, and your repair bill wasn't as much as plateware.
Oh god, I'd be broke.
My least favorite boss fight is absolutely Syndragosa on Heroic 25 man. On Heroic 25 man, she gave us more trouble than the Lich King did, actually, which is kind of weird. But yeah, it was mostly a few of the raiders having issues with getting to the markers in time when they were being chosen as the ice blocks, and they would just screw up and cause us to wipe because of it. Because they would either chain ice block like almost the entire raid, and we wouldn't have enough DPS to get everybody out, or they just wouldn't be paying attention. Because it was like a casual raid guild. I mean, we cleared shit and down stuff every week, but it wasn't super hardcore, which is what I enjoyed the most. And we just wiped so many times on it. And before I was in the guild that I'm referring to about having so much fun with, I actually led my own guild for a short time doing 10-man ICC. And on Syndragosa, we had a rogue in our raid group, and he was a dumbass. There's no nice way to put it. He wiped us this one attempt, and I'll never forget it. And I asked him what happened, and he says, I was trying to fix my recount. I facepalmed so hard.
Because, in MMORPGs, really... you're the only one with a recount.
Yeah, it's like your meter does not matter. I just want to kill this boss. But it wasn't that big of a deal. It was just such a facepalm moment that I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
Now, as far as tier sets go, I think we're coming up on tier 20, tier 19, tier 20, something like that.
Make me feel old.
So many tier sets. But looking back, what would you say is your favorite tier set as far as how they look?
There's a good decent out there. I'm gonna be good decent out there. I'm gonna say, because I'm biased, I'm gonna go with the Mage Fire Lord set. I wanted to make a transmog with the blue set with the scythe from the summer event. Even though that armor's not very mage-like, it's probably one of my favorite tier sets.
Yeah, it's tier 11, I believe. It's from Bastion of Twilight and Blackwing Descent, which is the first raids in Cataclysm.
Mm-hmm. Other than that, I would have to say I really like the challenge mode armor for the mage. That was probably my favorite one. That's very mage-like.
Yeah. Speaking of the challenge mode armor, with Legion, they made the challenge mode armor available again, and it's pretty easy to obtain. It's just from pretty much playing the game, but it's your class order hall set. Now, they're the same textures and everything, except for the colors are different, which is fine. But I was only able to obtain the Hunter and the Priest set back in Miss, and I really wanted some of the others, and now I'll still be able to get them.
There you go.
Unfortunately, I didn't get the weapons during Warlords of Draenor, though. I really wanted to get those, but kind of ran out of time towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
Boffman messaging me, distracting me.
Of course he is.
But now back to what we were talking about before we get too off topic. My favorite tier set, as far as the way it looks, is probably going to be the Rogue T10 set, the Geist set. Now, I have many other favorites, but that's just the one that sticks out the most to me, and it's the set that I'm actually rocking on my Rogue at the moment. I just really like how it looks. Just especially, I think it's mostly the helm and the shoulders. I like the spikes on the shoulders, and then the helm's just got like the Cyclops eye.
There you go.
And then can't forget the noose around the neck. That was pretty sweet. Now for least favorite tier set. Same rules as far as looks.
Well, before this, I didn't really have any, but Tier 9 Alliance versions, a lot of it is just to deal with. For the tier sets, though, Tier 9 was like one of the most generic. For WoW, you know, I always think like they're each individual. In Tier 9, they, like, if you're a leather user, you all look the same with a different color. The Horde pulled it off better than the Alliance, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. I hated the Alliance versions of this, which luckily at the time I was still Horde. I didn't switch to Alliance until early Cataclysm. It was early midway through Cataclysm. My faction changed and joined you guys on Tyrannus. But yeah, Tier 9 Alliance. Gross.
Oh, Alliance.
So that covers the mini questionnaire I had for us.
Yeah.
You want to go on to your next topic?
Yeah. So I'm going to just briefly talk about my favorite Final Fantasy XIV raid. Actually, it's more the favorite fight. While Alexander's been out, I haven't really done the raid in Savage mode. There's some interesting mechanics. The final boss, without any spoilers, Alexander dealt with time, so there's some interesting mechanics in there. But I really liked, because I was mostly active at the time, was the Binding Coils of Bahamut, and we divided them up into turns, and it was turn 8, which is the Avatar fight. To me, this was a pretty heavy mechanic fight that you had to deal with. There was a lot of pre-planning involved with this and reaction to it. The boss stands in the middle. It does not move from its spot. It just rotates. It has a frontal cleave of lasers. And during this fight, there's 4 towers representing each cardinal direction. And depending on what they're doing, each of them do a special effect. They're slowly ticking down. One tower would spawn an ad, one would spawn landmines that you had to step on, otherwise you wipe the raid, and two of them were just AoEs that hit everyone. And the main thing is you'd start with one tower, it'd be pretty simple, they tick down, but then you add in two towers, and if two towers tick down at the same time, or three, if you're not doing this right at all, it basically super buffs the boss and you basically wipe the raid. So there's a lot of planning involved, and the only way to control the ticks is someone steps on the tower platform, and that adds on like an extra 10 seconds and it throws off the ticks. And the disadvantage of that is every time you do that, you take a stacking debuff. When this fight first came out, you could take like 2 or 3 stacks. So you had to make sure you had everyone pre-planned. It was a lot of fun for me because I was in charge of the tower call out, so I had to react with that. And on top of that, you'd have to deal with the abilities activate. Also, there was another mechanic where it would confuse the main tank, and it would run and try to smack the nearest person, so you had to have someone stand underneath the boss, so it didn't rotate and just laser everyone and kill them. And he also had like a tether that you had to drag away from the group, and then one you had to stack up. And the other mechanic that was very frustrating is they had missile mechanic. The boss would launch 2 missiles of random types and would pin 2 people to the floor. And there's either a small or large missile, and depending on the size, you have to stack so many people on that marker, and the person that was pinned counted. So if you stacked right, sometimes you wouldn't have to do anything. So for small, it was 2 people required altogether, large was 3. And then towards the end of the fight, there was one last mechanic, which was a debuff that marked a player, and based on the damage that player took, it would hit the raid at the end. There was at least a few times, at least once I know, that I accidentally got the debuff and a mine spawned under me, and I took that to the face. I'm like, well, the raid's dead. So it was a really interesting mechanic that you had to deal with. There was plenty of times where you would have heart attacks over the debuff and stuff like that. So, is there anything else you wanted to comment on, Trav or Vicolan, before we move into the community time?
I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered everything that we wanted to, at least for this topic.
Okay, so
I'm sure there was a lot more that we could have went into, but
yeah, and rating's just a small part of MMORPGs. We definitely have more topics planned in the future. We'll get to the next topic in the future, though. Well, I'm just going to go through some community answers. We asked a question about people to basically just comment on raids. So anyone in the chat right now, if you have any questions or comments you want to say after I'm done here, we'll go ahead and talk about that. So 2 of our friends here posted back. One of them talked about they didn't really have much experience with raiding, but they did find out about hilarious moments like Leroy Jenkins. I'm pretty sure that's a raid, or that was just a dungeon at the time. This was back in vanilla WoW, so it could be anything for that. And that definitely brings up the subject that while raiding can be stressful sometimes, you do have some moments where you're just laughing your head off. Or stupid moments like me when I was playing a mage and they added time warp and my key bindings were terrible, and almost every other pull I popped heroism. Who needs a ready check when I pop heroism? We're gonna kill it now.
time warping on trash.
It was super trash. It needed to die. My excuse every time is if we look intimidating, it'll die. So, and heroism increased you by double in size, so we were pretty intimidating. Kill trash real quickly. And then another comment we got that for one of my friends here is that raiding is more about building a trustworthy group with communication and friends more than loot for him. And then a lot of his friends know him, his middle name and his habits more so with the people that he works with. And a lot of that too, I think, with raiding is that, you know, you do develop some kind of friendship or at least a family feel. These are people that you unless they're people that don't show up to raid very often, these are people you see on a regular basis. And sometimes they're your real life friends and sometimes they're just your online friends. I mean, if it wasn't for that, I really wouldn't have met Vicolan in raiding. I didn't really meet him till Cataclysm, but I didn't do a whole lot of reading till Cataclysm, just here and there. And
Yeah, but I mean, without WoW or rating, we still would have met. 'Cause we had
probably,
mutual friends.
yeah. And I mean, a lot of that too is still to this day in Final Fantasy. I continue to make friends and stuff like that. It's still an enjoyable experience, and that's how I've gotten into guilds and get to raid with guilds sometime. So, doesn't look like we have any comments or questions or anything from what I can see here. I think that's enough time for Twitch's delay to catch up. I could be mistaken.
Yeah, that's good.
Any final comments, Vicolan?
Not really. I definitely enjoy doing this. If you guys have any suggestions on what we should cover in our next podcast, please let us know on our social medias or comment down below on YouTube. This is going to be uploaded on YouTube later. Yeah. So, yeah, just let us know.
So, don't forget to follow us. Like Vicolan said here, any questions, comments are always appreciated. This is just the first episode. I've only done a few podcasts, so definitely any advice for sure. And we'll be working on our next subject. We are planning, it'll be next month to do this again, probably on a Wednesday again. Let's see here. If I can look at a calendar. That put us at about the 26th of April. And we'll figure out a new subject and stuff like that for you guys. So it's been a pleasure, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.